I have to say, I hope that you all agree that we've shown what's possible, that we've shown that an industrial gas can be turned into a Lululemon short or a Zara dress, a Unilever detergent, and sustainable aviation fuel. And I hope it gives us hope that we can scale.
Super, super cool. And then hopefully in the next iteration, we can take all those discarded Lululemon shorts and turn them back into fuel and just complete the cycle. Because, my God, a lot of waste in the fast fashion industry. Though I don't think Lululemon classifies as fast fashion.
Not quite.
Too expensive. This is ClimateTech with Kentaro, a podcast featuring the brightest minds and most influential voices in climate tech. I'm your host, Kentaro Kawamori. It would be easier to tell you all of the things our next guest hasn't done than the ones she has. Dr. Jennifer Holmgren is the CEO of LanzaTech. I'll take you through all 200 pages of her extremely impressive CV, but first, let's get into what LanzaTech does. They're developing chemicals and fuels made out of industrial waste gases. Pretty cool. And if you don't know how cool that is, let me break it down. Basically, they're taking greenhouse gas emissions from steel mills or landfills and turning them into everything from leggings to jet fuel. As for Jennifer's bio, which we'll dig into later in the show, she has 50 patents, 30 scientific publications, a PhD, and an MBA under her belt. Before she was brought on board at LanzaTech, she was the VP and General Manager of the Renewable Energy and Chemicals Business Unit at UOP, which is a Honeywell company. So, in this episode, Jennifer gave me an AP Chem lesson on LanzaTech's conversion process. We talked about the myriad of uses for carbon recycling technology, and we got into scaling up a company from a startup to going public.
LanzaTech is trying to show the world that we have enough carbon above ground, enough waste carbon to make everything we need. In other words, we can keep fossil carbon in the ground where it belongs. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is change the way the world makes stuff.
There is a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be changed on how we do it. So talk us through the company setup. So you've got LanzaTech, and it sounds like then maybe there's a spin-off, which is the jet fuel business. Is that a correct assumption?
You know, that's absolutely right. So what happened is LanzaTech, let me tell you about the tech. So we are a company that does gas fermentation. So we take gases, instead of fermenting sugar to make beer, we actually make beer by taking industrial gases or gasified waste. So hydrogen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, our organism, that's what it likes to eat, and it makes ethanol. We've developed the technology. We've commercialized the technology. We have 3 plants now running in China at steel mills and at ferroalloy plants that literally this flue gas that would go out the flue as particulate emissions and greenhouse gases, we prevent that, we pump it into a reactor, and we make ethanol. We want to use all these waste resources, which means we're going to make trillions of gallons of ethanol. Now, the world does not need trillions of gallons of ethanol, right? Hopefully, EVs will get rid of the need to do that.
I'm no chemist, though I wish I was, because chemists are pretty cool. But I will do my best to break this down. Ethanol is a chemical that can be used to make a ton of different products, everything from fuel to plastic. Usually, it's created by fermenting the sugar in crops like corn or barley. With this new technology, ethanol can be made faster, and it can be made using waste that would otherwise be discarded. Meanwhile, technology like electric vehicles are decreasing the need for ethanol-based fuels. So Jennifer and LanzaTech are taking the whole thing further by converting the ethanol they create.
And so what we had to do is say, look, ethanol is just an intermediate, okay? Ethanol is a way for us to take all of these waste resources that you can't aggregate and convert them into something you can move around, right? Once you've got a liquid, you can move it around and convert it to other stuff. So what we did is we developed a way to make jet fuel because we believe that aviation is one of those hard to abate sectors. We're going to need hydrocarbons for a really long time. Hydrocarbons have the energy density that you need to put on a plane to be able to fly from Orlando to Gatwick, right? You got to get across the pond. And so We developed that technology as a use of ethanol, but that technology is thermocatalytic. It's completely different than the biology the company does. And so we felt that spinning it out and letting it stand on its own and have its own resources and its own capital would make it go faster than having it be a part of a bigger gas fermentation company. So that's what we did.
The jet fuel side of the business was spun out under the appropriate name of LanzaJet.
We're about going fast as we can go.
Appropriate for a jet fuel company, and couldn't be a hotter space, so to speak. I know that basically every sustainable aviation fuel company is contracted for years on supply, and there's very little new supply coming on. So that's exciting. I'm going to try to go toe to toe with you on your fermentation knowledge. One of my co-founders and I recently invested into a great kombucha company in Sedona, Arizona. And that doesn't really qualify me for being a fermentation expert, but I got to see industrial scale fermentation and a kombucha. Shout out to Wild Tonic Kombucha. Sedona should be the only kombucha you're drinking. Free advertisement there. Okay, got to wrap my head around this because I've never seen it. Definitely would love to see it someday. So big industrial plant, waste process emissions coming out the flue. You capture it somehow, you pipe it into a vessel or a tank. Then it starts going through its own industrial line, which includes fermentation along the way. Out comes the new end product. Crazy simplified, but did I capture that right?
You got it right. Yep.
Interesting.
Just a nuance for you. Kombucha or any other sugar fermentation is done in a batch, right? You have a big reactor and you just ferment for days, weeks, months. Our fermentation is a continuous process. It looks much more like a refinery. Gas in, product out. Chemistry happens in seconds, which is why this is so scalable as a path to make fuels, to make chemicals that are currently made massive scale.
In seconds. Interesting. I did not know that was possible. So give us a little chemistry lesson here. So the typical fermentation process takes a while because cultures have to grow and they need heat and time to do that. So how does that work on this smaller, faster scale?
Yeah, so here it's the same thing. So actually the organisms reproduce quickly. We fill a bioreactor with them and it's basically a big column, right? Sugar is soluble in water. These gases are not soluble in water. So what you really have to do is develop a reactor that creates enough turbulence as the gas is going through that the organism sees the bubble of gas and eats it. And then it just literally poops out ethanol very quickly. It's a very fast process.
Fascinating. And then the ethanol comes in traditional form, easily transported, goes to the point source of distribution, and then off to the markets.
Exactly. Nothing different. As soon as it's recovered, you just distill it out. And then whatever you do with ethanol normally, you continue to do it here.
Crazy cool. And actually don't know if the ethanol subsidies still exist here in the US from the federal government. Is that still a thing? I know it was a while back.
It is, but we don't qualify, actually, believe it or not. So we qualify for the low carbon fuel standard in California, but the RFS is not technology neutral. It's feedstock defined. If you start with corn, if you start with sugarcane, if you start with something like that, you get a credit. We start with an industrial gas, so we don't qualify. And quite frankly, that's why our first plants are in China, next plant in India, because if we don't qualify in the US, we're at a disadvantage relative to other ethanol, not just from a price, but from a market, because it's a standard that requires blending. So we just had to build plants somewhere else.
I love that because we spend so much time talking about and complaining about all the barriers and progress or lack of progress domestically or in the EU. And if you just look at the numbers, it really doesn't matter. If China and India don't drastically abate their carbon curves, then nothing is really going to matter. So the fact that you're doing it there makes a ton of sense, but also is extremely important because there's not nearly enough innovation going on in those geographies.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the founding of Lanza. So you've got this incredibly varied and deep background. Tell us a little bit about the origin of the company. How'd you get here?
I was brought in 2010 when the company was ready to scale. So the company was founded by Sean Simpson and Richard Forster in New Zealand with the view that the world needed to make biofuels from something other than food. And so they founded the company, they trialed it at a steel mill in New Zealand and showed that it was possible to actually have an organism that efficiently ate gases. And it was after that that I came to LanzaTech. I was actually getting ready to retire. I was done. But what happened was, one of the things, I think you mentioned that I had done the very first drop in aviation fuel when I was at UOP, which is part of Honeywell. And we were able to prove that you could actually make a drop-in fuel.
A drop-in fuel is a sustainable alternative that can be used to replace traditional fossil fuels without changing the existing systems. It can be dropped in.
It looked identical to kerosene. Actually, it had some even better properties. But the problem was all the feedstock we were using was oils, fats, greases. You know, the world uses 100 billion gallons of jet fuel. You weren't going to do that with fats and greases. You couldn't get there from here. And the world also uses 100 million barrels per day of fossil equivalent to make fuels, chemicals, power. There's this massive gap that I could see. You can't get there from here, kind of like the old joke, right? So I was introduced to Sean Simpson by Vinod Khosla, and they talked to me about using carbon monoxide. And I thought to myself, holy shit, if this works, if this is scalable, there's so much feedstock that finally there's something that you can get to the scale of today's petro complexes, right? And I thought to myself, well, I gotta try it. I gotta see if we can make this work. I gotta help scale this and show the world what's possible. And so that's why I came to LanzaTech. And I have to say, I hope that you all agree that we've shown what's possible, that we've shown that an industrial gas can be turned into a Lululemon short or a Zara dress, a Unilever detergent, and sustainable aviation fuel. And I hope it gives us hope that we can scale.
Super, super cool. And then hopefully in the next iteration, we can take all those discarded Lululemon shorts and turn them back into fuel and just complete the cycle. Because, my God, a lot of waste in the fast fashion industry. Though I don't think Lululemon classifies as fast fashion. No, not quite. Too expensive. Fascinating. I also really love that baller move where you just casually mentioned Vinod Khosla, one of the most successful VCs of all time. Is it fair to assume that Khosla Ventures is an investor in Lanza then?
Yeah, Khosla Ventures is the largest investor in LanzaTech, absolutely. Was when I started and is today.
Very cool. Maybe a good juncture. Tell us a little bit about kind of size of the company, how many facilities, how many people, funding raise, if you can disclose that. I know you're going through a SPAC process to the extent that you can.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that, obviously, knowing you're under restrictions of what you can say.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what is public. So first of all, we've gotten here after having raised $500 million. So this company has taken $500 million in 17 years to get to where we are today. We have 3 commercial plants in operation in China. We are building plants in India, Europe, Canada, Japan. So we're really diffusing the technology now, which is what you need to do to really get to an economically viable place. Biggest investor is Vinod Khosla. We've been very fortunate, I have to say, to have gotten the type of support we've gotten from investors. We have a lot of strategic investors, but we also have Khosla Ventures, New Zealand Superannuation Fund, Novel. And these investors have stuck with us for years. You know, that is one thing that is really important to highlight is 17 years is way longer than the typical life of a fund. And yet they stuck with us, right? They haven't pressured us to do the wrong thing, to skip steps and scale up. And I think that's how you get here is by actually doing it right. I think a lot of companies failed by skipping steps, and there's just no shortcut to building a completely new disruptive technology. And I'm very grateful to our investors for having been a part of this journey.
Such an important point. I got to spend a little bit of time with the founders of TAE Technologies, who you probably know, pursuing the fusion vision, and similar sort of time frame as you all, right? It takes a really long-weighted and visionary set of investors to pursue these scientific breakthroughs. And you mentioned the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. There's not a lot of investors that structurally are actually equipped to make long-weighted bets like that. So the big sovereign wealth with big horizons like that makes a ton of sense. And I've heard great things about them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very exciting. So tell us a little bit about, to the extent that you can, the SPAC. Entering the public markets after 17 years is obviously a pretty gigantic step. What prompted that? Anything you can share on that?
What I can share is we're doing this for two reasons. One is it's time. 17 years. We've demonstrated the technology works. We know it's scalable. We have a really robust pipeline. And we've also shown the back end that we can make products that people want, right? We're not an ethanol story. We're an everything story. So that is important. So the foundation is there.
LanzaTech is working on going public using a process we've talked about before on the show called a SPAC. Stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company. And in a nutshell, a management team or sponsor forms a SPAC, goes through an IPO or initial public offering, and once that SPAC is listed, it merges with the privately held company that wants to go public. Compared to traditional IPOs, SPAC IPOs are generally quicker.
The public markets give you different visibility. And quite frankly, the only reason we get up in the morning is we need to change our carbon trajectory. We got to bend the carbon curve and it's not bending. And we need to get the visibility to show the world that this is possible. You can actually wear something that didn't start life as fossil carbon. We can reuse apparel. We can reuse all sorts of things. And we can do this at a fundamental carbon recycling level. That visibility is really important to us. I believe that it will change what others do. So, a lot of people worry about the competition. We want competition. We want people knowing this works and that they need to do it too. There's plenty of room for all of us to bend the carbon curve, and we better get at it really, really fast. So by being part of the public market, we hope to show the world what's possible. And frankly, we're going to be the first carbon capture and transformation company. And honestly, it's kind of cool and important.
Super cool. And you're doing some of that showing, or rather telling, here on the show. So we appreciate you doing that. And so let's switch gears a little bit. We want to hear a little bit about you, the woman, the legend. You're Colombian by ethnicity, I believe, but you have a very Nordic last name. Tell us, where are you from? Where are you today? Let's talk a little bit about your journey personally.
Sure. I was born in Barranquilla, Colombia, which is on the coast. So was born in the Caribbean. My father moved to work for Avianca. He worked for Avianca, the Colombian airline. So I have a good airline aviation history. Mm-hmm. Worked for Avianca, moved to the United States in 1969 when I was 9. And just for your reference, I thought LA was cold. Okay.Moving from the Caribbean to LA was like, oh my God, it's so cold here. And then of course I ended up in the Midwest. So I had no idea what cold was. So we moved in 1969, gave me a great opportunity actually to be part of the American story, right? Which is get an education, right? Public schools, and then gave me the opportunity to go to Harvey Mudd and then get a graduate degree. So that was my journey. I had a passion for energy democracy, actually. What I wanted to do is make sure that everybody had access to power. And 1.3 billion people, I remember, 1.3 billion people don't have access to power. Think about what that world is like, right? But then I realized that climate change was going to impact everybody in our lifetime. And that's when I started to realize that what we needed was clean energy. I actually got really excited. Well, God, that is a terrible word to use here. I decided climate change was something I needed to work on when I read a story actually about Colombian coffee, that if climate change was left unabated by the year 2050, which is in our lifetimes, right, Kentaro, that Colombia would not be a coffee producer. And then I discovered that 80% of today's coffee growing areas would not be coffee producers. I have to say, that was only 10 years ago. And I didn't realize that climate change was something that could have that type of an impact in our lifetime on everything we do. It's a fundamental change to our ecosystem, to our way of life. And so that's when I decided, holy shit, we better do something and we better do it fast. 10 years on, I think we all know that this is actually true, that we're disrupting our ability to live on this planet, or at least to thrive on this planet. So here we are, talking about it and trying to do something about it, just like you are.
What a journey. And you've certainly been at it much longer than some of us have. So we're always in the debt of the way that you've carved for us. And you know what? I actually love that you called it exciting. Certainly climate change is not exciting, but what is exciting is when people come together and find a sense of purpose and pursue fixing those things for the betterment of others, right? That's community, and that is super exciting. You know, and it reminds me of a Japanese concept, which is actually fascinating for me, getting quite a bit of traction at Persefoni, which is ikigai, if you've ever heard of that, which is a Japanese concept, sort of philosophy about referring to something that gives you a sense of purpose or a reason for living. And you've certainly, what you described is your ikigai.
Yeah.
So very cool.
It is cool. Actually, you're right that it is exciting, a community coming together to basically transform our carbon economy, right? If you think about what we're all trying to do, because petroleum is ubiquitous, right? And is what we've developed around, it's what we have to do. And it's massive, which means it's an opportunity for everybody.
No doubt about it. It's going to touch every part of life and the economy. And yeah, I saw the latest numbers. Planet's going to eclipse 8 billion people this year. Yeah, we got a lot of work to do. And it's gonna touch a lot of lives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you come to America in '69. You end up going to school here. How did you get started on the career path that you did? So you have this vision and this passion for clean energy and democratizing access to energy. What was your next step after school?
Okay, so my first step after school was I literally went to work at UOP, and I was making catalysts and systems for the petroleum sector. And that is, like you said, when you realize that petroleum is ubiquitous, right? It's in everything. It's not just fuels and power. It's all the chemicals which end up being everything we use. And so not too long after that, I started managing kind of the new areas for the company. How do we get into alternative feedstocks? What's really funny is at the time, alternative feedstocks were natural gas. And so that's what we were working on. And that quickly changed to, wait, this is the same thing and it will have the same impact. And so we need to change further. And I started looking at biological feedstocks and realizing this massive gap in the amount of product you can make from today's existing feedstocks. And that's when I started to pursue other feedstocks beyond conventional biomass. And more importantly than that, that is when I also started to meet people who were thinking about the same things, right? A community of people who would get together and identify the gaps. Okay, how do you destroy cellulose? How do you destroy a tree and convert it into something useful? How do you do that sustainably? That's when I got introduced to the round table of sustainable biomaterials, right? You know, that taught me that, you know, you also need to worry about the societal issues, right? Social justice is just as important as the greenhouse gas issues. If you want to be certified, don't just certify your process, certify the whole supply chain and how people interact with that supply chain. And it really taught me a lot about how to think about sustainability and how to think about social justice. And I can't separate those two things, right? I don't know what else to tell you other than that I've been brought up by a lot of people who are passionate about climate, who are passionate about energy, but who are more than that, passionate about people. We don't do any of this for the planet. We do it for the people. We do it for the creatures. We do it to create a better world, right? One where society behaves differently. I know this seems like quite a segue from where we started, but at LanzaTech, we used to say that What we dream of is a day when every child will pick up a blue crayon to draw the sky, because this whole fossil economy is why people in China and India get up in the morning and see brown. Anyways, that's a long answer.
I mean, it's the ultimate answer, right? It's why we all do what we do, or at least the majority of us in this community, which is what's so special about it, right? We wake up with that ikigai every morning. And probably for you and me included, we are part of the richest elite on the planet as Americans, right? And then within that, we have done pretty well in business. And so we're going to be just fine. But to your point, there are billions of others that are not going to be fine.
Yep.
I was watching some dystopian sort of future vision movie show. I can't remember what it was. And it had these kids living on this trash planet. And they had just essentially grown up in this heap of trash. And I know what it was. It was the new TV show for Halo. If you remember the big video game from a while back. Yeah. So I made a TV show about it. There's this trash planet, which literally all the other civilizations, they just bring their spaceships and they drop the trash on it. And there's a population that works the trash heaps, the machines and all that sort of stuff. Then they come and grab these kids because they make them super soldiers or whatever with their experiments. But as part of that, these kids were, 10, 11, 12. And they look back on their memories when they're growing up and they remember the revelation. It's so funny. This is what triggered it. They literally were drawing with crayons pictures of the sky that their parents had told them about, which they had never actually seen.
Yeah.
Because all they had seen was this dystopian,
right,
Wall-E looking landscape. The reality is that exists today.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize that, right? I mean, if you haven't been to places like India, like China, like the Philippines, many, many other places around the world, millions of people live like that today. That is not an exaggeration. So yeah, there's a hell of a lot of work to do.
Yep.
On that note, how do we get better, right? So we keep doing what we do, but for anybody that's looking to get into the space, for the next generations, whether they're in school, coming up, what's your advice on folks wanting to enter the industry, thinking about entering the industry from the lessons you've learned so far?
Well, I think entering the industry means you have to balance urgency with a long-term view. And that seems like a disconnect, but it's not. It's actually the reality that we live in, right? And if you balance those two things, you will be successful. You can balance that in everything that you do. You can be in finance like you are. You can be in science like I am. You can be a storyteller and help people understand the story and help coalesce people around what needs to happen. So my only comment is, one, everything that you can do, you can contribute to this fight. In other words, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be an investor. You can be anything, and you just need to do something. That's my only message, is we will not solve this problem unless every single one of us jumps into this and contributes and thinks about every single day, what can I do to have an impact? And that could just be walking to work that morning or biking to work that morning or whatever. Just do something. That's my first message. I think the second message is we need to think about how we scale technology. This is what I know, so I'm going to focus on technology. We need to think about how we scale technology in different ways than we have been. You and I already talked, Kentaro, about the fact that to do something disruptive in tech, you need a long-term view, 15, 20-year funds. That's the first part of it. But the other thing we can do to accelerate is help to get to the next scale. We call it crossing the valley of death, right? So you got to go from lab to pilot, from pilot to demo, from demo to the first commercial. And there's a risk profile that makes the capital for each of those steps very, very expensive. We need to figure out how governments and industry can come together to accelerate building demonstrations and first commercials. Otherwise, we waste a lot of time floating around in there with companies like mine trying to raise the cash to do that. Small startup companies struggle to get that cash and figure out how to do it. So new business models, new technology, new financing approaches, that is the only way to be successful. And we have to not be afraid to fail. You know, You gotta be able to throw everything at the wall. We don't have time to spend 3 years deciding whether tech A versus tech B versus tech C. Just scale them all, right? Fail fast, right? Scale them all. Okay, it looks like you've wasted money, but we're already wasting money by climate catastrophe, right? So scale, 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 deploy, 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 fail, succeed, fail, succeed, succeed, succeed. That's the only way we're going to be able to do this fast enough. You probably have a view on all of that since this is what you do. I'd love to hear it.
Totally. Yeah. In the software industry, what you call the valley of death, somebody popularized the term of crossing the chasm a while back and achieving product market fit. And luckily for us, we can do that in a minutia of the time it takes you guys in the physical science side, right? Where you can iterate and deploy code and change it very quickly. I actually had a conversation with somebody on my team recently on the topic of failure. And I actually came to the realization is I don't actually ever use that term. I don't use the term failure. And for us, we talk a lot about growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And to your point, I just don't see the world in terms of failure, right? It's testing. You make the best decision you can with the data that you have and the people that you have. And if it doesn't work out, you iterate and you move on. It's not failure. It's just a new data point that tells you that is not the path unequivocally, and you move forward. So I love that. Back to your advice as well. It's something I frequently urge people is just stop overthinking. Just try it. Just do it. And if it doesn't work out, oh well, move on to something else.
Yep.
Try it differently.
Yep.
Okay, I know it's been a minute since we did one of these, but they're my favorite. Here's my rapid fire round with Jennifer. Give you a softball to kick it off. Favorite Star Wars movie?
Ooh, The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, all right. Classic. Favorite place to travel or vacation?
Hawaii. I love the beach.
Yeah, what island?
The Big Island. I like to stay in Puako, which is North Kona.
Yeah, I lived in Oahu for about a year.
Oh, cool.
And spent quite a bit of time in Kona on the Big Island too. So you like the kind of the mix of the plains with the forests and the ocean?
Yeah.
Like it. What are you currently reading?
I am reading a book called Think Slow, Think Fast. It is about how your brain tackles problems and how you have two sides, and one side is intuitive, but the other side actually has to put a lot of effort in thinking about a problem. So I'm halfway through it. It's kind of an interesting perspective on how we think, and it's quite cool.
I've not read that one, but I've heard good things about it. Your top 3 favorite books of all time?
Well, one of my favorite books is called The Little Prince, and it's a story about always looking with your heart. So that's kind of something I care a lot about. Another book that I really like is Ministry of the Future. And the reason I like that is because that first chapter drives home the urgency and the timing of climate change. And I really think that's important. Third favorite book, I like a book called A Gentleman in Moscow. I thought that was kind of a cool, interesting book. I love to read. Today, these are my 3 favorites. Another day, it'll be a different set.
That is super interesting. Somebody else just cited Gentleman in Moscow, and I had added it to my list, but I haven't read it yet. Historical fiction.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, actually. It's a fun read.
Yeah, I mean, I see in your background, you only have like 8,000 books, so it feels like you need some more. All right, 2 more. What's your superpower?
That I'm a girl.
It's a pretty good superpower. All right, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Don't sweat the details. Just move on. Don't let anything slow you down or bog you down. Just keep moving.
Wow, fascinating. Because I often tell my teams, if you can't get the details right, you can't get anything right.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you're executing, you need to focus on the details. So I don't mean not to focus on the details, but when you're thinking about what you want to do and how you want to get it done and getting the broader vision, the problem is sometimes you get slowed down if you think about the details too early. I guess that's all I'm trying to say.
That makes sense. Just don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, basically.
Exactly.
Well, excellent. This was a super fun one. We will sign off. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll hope to have you back in the future.
Thanks, Kentaro.
Make sure to check out Jennifer Holmgren and her work at LanzaTech. Links are in our show notes as always. Before we go, please don't forget to subscribe to ClimateTech with Kentaro on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another fantastic episode. Catch you all then. ClimateTech with Kentaro is produced by our incredible team at Persefoni and Hueman Group Media. Our theme music is by Guest House. And if you want to learn more about Persefoni and our climate management and accounting platform, please visit our website at persefoni.com.